Hello and welcome once again to my Battle of Five Armies project vlog. In the last entry I showed off the Men of Laketown, led by their stoic champion Bard, the mighty Beorn in his great bear form, and a somewhat unimpressive dragon, trying its best to do a Smaug impression. As you can probably tell, the Smaug miniature is not one that came with the box set. It's actually a Reaper Bones miniature, and it's supposed to represent a newly hatched dragon in 28mm scale. I bought it thinking it would size up quite well for a dragon at 10mm scale, and it almost does, but Smaug isn't just any dragon, is he? So while it worked for a thematic photo, I'm not convinced it'll ever see action on the table. This would be a good time to mention that despite being a standalone boxed game, there are actually extra miniatures produced for the Battle of Five Armies. To bolster the forces included in the box, you could buy metal blister packs, such as Elven Cavalry, Dwarf Archers, Hill Trolls, Mirkwood Spiders, Gigantic Bats, the Goblin King and his Guard, a Storm Giant, and yes, the one and only Smaug the Magnificent. And as you can see, the official Smaug miniature is, well, a lot more impressive than my current stand-in. As you'd imagine, these miniatures that were made for a short-lived niche 20-year-old standalone game aren't exactly common as muck these days. A quick look on eBay and yikes. Now, for most of the aforementioned minis, there are some excellent alternatives available from the likes of Copplestone Castings and Pendragon, who produce excellent 10mm fantasy figures. But for some reason 10mm scale dragons are harder to find, and the few that I could find didn't fit the lithe and serpent-like depictions of Smaug, which lit up my imagination as a child. In terms of pose and proportions, I do actually like the Reaper Dragon quite a bit. He's definitely serpent-like and dynamic. I just think he's too small, sadly, especially when shown next to Beorn here, who is admittedly huge for this scale. Oh well, the search for a suitable Smaug will go on, and if you have any recommendations yourselves, then please do pop them in the comments below. While still on the subject, I should explain as to why Smaug would even be in a game about the Battle of Five Armies. After all, his death is the reason that the battle occurs at all. Everyone involved is fighting for a piece of Smaug's treasure hoard. Well, while the focus of the boxed game is to recreate that particular battle, the rulebook also includes suggestions on how to recreate conflicts in the lead up to that climactic finale, as well as some hypothetical alternative events. This includes Smaug's desolation of Laketown, whereby the men must try and defend their homes from the dragon's wrath, while Bard tries to find a soft target for his legendary Black Arrow. You can also just play standard pitched battles just for fun. I mean, it is just Middle-earth Warmaster at the end of the day. The game even hints at this with the subtitle of Great Battles of Middle-earth on the box. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and I should really get back to the task at hand. So what have I been doing since the last video? Well, I previously mentioned that I wasn't entirely happy with my homemade modular river. I liked the overall look of it, but it didn't connect up all that well and suffered with a bit of warping. I decided to try and resolve one of those issues. I bought myself a cheap rotary tool and set about sawing off the bumpy rounded ends of each of the river sections. Despite sounding like a dentist's drill, it was a lot of fun, although I had a few instances of saw blades shattering and launching shrapnel everywhere. Oops. I wore glasses after that. A burning throat also quickly reminded me that you need ventilation and a face mask for this sort of thing. It's probably common sense for most people, but sadly I'm not most people. Once that was done, the river sections connected in a much more seamless manner. I later added magnets to help them stay together on the tabletop a bit better. The warping still remains an issue, but they're a bit more usable now, I think. What do you reckon? While on the subject of magnets, I started to think about ways to store and transport my painted models. I have drawers for my 28mm stuff, but everything ends up getting a bit bunched up in there, and I'm determined to keep my Battle of Five Armies stuff in good condition. My wife works in a hospital and often laments the waste that is produced in her job. One day she brought home a hard plastic box about the size of a thick hardback novel. She explained that they are cases that heart monitors come in, and asked if I had any use for them, as her hospital throws away endless amounts of them. Of course, I said yes, and so now I have a stack of them, ready to live a much more important second life protecting my lovely miniatures. I ordered some magnetic sheeting, and with a Stanley knife, I set about cutting it down to size. The boxes are about 45mm deep, so big enough to store 10mm figures on both sides. Satisfyingly, a single magnetic sheet is the perfect size to line the box completely with just a little left over. Even more satisfying was how perfectly my evil army filled it. Each stand has two 1.5 by 2mm magnets in the base, which is just enough to keep them secure, though I may add more at a later date to be extra safe. I'm really happy with them, and I can imagine stacking a load of them on a shelf like books. I'm contemplating whether it'd be worth making them look a bit more thematic, maybe with vinyl stickers or something, I don't know. Again, if you have any ideas on that, let me know. Anyway, that's quite enough preamble, don't you think? Let's end this episode as we always do, with some pretty pictures of freshly painted minis and some excerpts from the book that inspired them. The next day, the wind shifted west and the air was dark and gloomy. The morning was still early when a cry was heard in the camp. Runners came in to report that a host of dwarves had appeared around the eastern spur of the mountain and was now hastening to Dale. Dain had come. He had hurried on through the night and so had come upon them sooner than they had expected. Each one of his folk was clad in a hauberk of steel mail that hung to his knees, and his legs were covered with a hose of fine and flexible metal mesh, the secret of whose making was possessed by Dain's people. The dwarves were exceedingly strong for their height, but most of these were strong even for dwarves. In battle they wielded heavy two-handed mattocks, but each of them had also a short broadsword at his side and a round shield slung at his back. Their beards were forked and plaited and thrust into their belts. Their caps were of iron, and they were shod with iron, and their faces were grim. Trumpets called men and elves to arms. Before long, the dwarves could be seen coming up the valley at a great pace. They halted between the river and the eastern spur, but a few held on their way, and crossing the river drew near the camp, and there they laid down their weapons and held up their hands in a sign of peace. Bard went out to meet them, and with him went Bilbo. "We are sent from Dain, son of Nain," they said when questioned. "We are hastening to our kinsman in the mountain, since we learn that the kingdom of old is renewed. But who are you that sit in the plain as foes before defended walls?" This, of course, in the polite and rather old-fashioned language of such occasions meant simply, "You have no business here. We are going on, so make way or we shall fight you." They meant to push on between the mountain and the loop of the river, for the narrow land there did not seem so strongly guarded. Bard, of course, refused to allow the dwarfs to go straight on to the mountain. He was determined to wait until the gold and silver had been brought out in exchange for the Arkenstone, for he did not believe that this would be done if once the fortress was manned with so large and warlike a company. They had brought with them great store of supplies, for the dwarves can carry very heavy burdens, and nearly all of Dain's folk, in spite of their rapid march, bore huge packs on their backs in addition to their weapons. They could stand a siege for weeks, and by that time yet more dwarves might come, and yet more, for Thorin had many relatives. Also, they would be able to reopen and guard some other gate, so that the besiegers would have to encircle the whole mountain, and for that they had not sufficient numbers. These were in fact precisely their plans, for the raven messengers had been busy between Thorin and Dain. But for the moment the way was barred, so after angry words the dwarf messengers retired, muttering in their beards. Bard then sent messengers at once to the gate, but they found no gold or payment. Arrows came forth as soon as they were within shot, and they hastened back in dismay. In the camp all was now astir, as if for battle, for the dwarves of Dain were advancing along the eastern bank. "Fools!" laughed Bard, "to come thus beneath the mountain's arm. They do not understand war above ground, whatever they may know of battle in the mines. There are many of our archers and spearmen now hidden in the rocks upon their right flank. Dwarf mail may be good, but they will soon be hard put to it. Let us set on them now from both sides, before they are fully rested. But the Elven King said, "Long will I tarry, ere I begin this war for gold. The dwarves cannot pass us unless we will or do anything that we cannot mark. Let us hope still for something that will bring reconciliation. Our advantage in numbers will be enough, if in the end it must come to unhappy blows." But he reckoned without the dwarves. The knowledge that the Arkenstone was in the hands of the besiegers burned in their thoughts. And also they guessed the hesitation of Bard and his friends and resolved to strike while they debated. Suddenly, without a signal, they sprang silently forward to attack. Bows twanged and arrows whistled. Battle was about to be drawn.